Fox 5 and Hot 97 present Street Soldiers with Lisa Evers.
The trial, United States of America versus Sean Diddy Combs.
She says Diddy raped her and assaulted her. She said that telling him no was not an option.
Shocking allegations against one of the most famous men in the world.
As we proceed to give you what you need.
A federal RICO case that could send Sean Diddy Combs away for life.
He's going to fight this to the end. He's innocent.
A Street Soldiers on location special from federal court. Diddy on trial. The fight of his life. I'm so glad you're joining us for this special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy Trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. We're bringing this to you from our street side pop-up studio outside federal court, where the 6th week of testimony just wrapped up. It's moving along, but the real question is it going anywhere? Now, one juror has been kicked off the jury, and a second may follow as the momentum is building and this trial moves on. Now, Mrs. Janice Combs, Sean Diddy Combs' mother, arrived for court this morning, as she does nearly every single day. This morning, though, it was a blow for the defense, as the judge ordered a 41-year-old black man who listens to 90s hip-hop to be dismissed. Things are really heating up in the courtroom here. The day began with a furious judge blasting the lawyers from both the defense and the prosecution about an online leak in an article that contained information that only the lawyers could know and that was supposed to be sealed. The judge warning them that in defiance of the gag order, and if they defied the gag order, they could face criminal as well as civil charges on this. There was intense interest in who was supposed to be on the stand here today. Another former assistant of Diddy's, this one a former Syracuse University basketball player who was allegedly Diddy's drug mule. Now that won't be happening due to a sick juror and court being postponed. The prosecution had expected to finish up their case by this weekend, but now that's in doubt. Tomorrow is the Juneteenth federal holiday, so all courts are closed. And Friday's session will only be a half day, so another juror can attend her son's graduation. Let's get into the key legal issues with attorney Robin Nunn. Robin, the prosecution has brought on what they call summary witnesses. What is that?
So,
what are they?
Yeah, so summary witnesses are quite common in cases where there's a voluminous amounts of data. In this case in particular, there are hundreds of terabytes of data. There have been over 500 exhibits presented. It's an overwhelming task for a juror to be able to parse that apart. So the prosecutors have prepared certain exhibits, and these fact witnesses, which in this case is a federal agent as well as a paralegal, are going to take the stand and explain to the jury what exactly has been entered into evidence, and even evidence that hasn't been entered into evidence by a testifying witness. So essentially, they have a chronology of the freak-offs, starting from 2009 to August 2024, when Jane testified that it was her last freak-off. They have a chart, and they're going to explain who was there, where they were, how they traveled there, and who paid for it. So the jury understands.
And I think that'll be really helpful, because there were hundreds of testimony, and even sitting there, taking notes and listening to the testimony in court, it's like, which year is this? Where does this begin? Where does this period end? What are we talking about? Who are we talking about? So this is basically giving them kind of an outline, right?
Yes, Lisa, it's very confusing for the jury. This is the 6th week of trial, and as you can imagine, they've heard from dozens of witnesses, they've seen lots of exhibits, they've watched videos, they've read text messages. At this point, they're really trying to figure out what's going on.
And then in terms of the prosecution case, the prosecutors are wrapped up their part of the case or part of the trial. How do you think they've done? Have they hit the mark to prove these charges, or have they missed it?
Well, I think they hope they've hit the mark. They actually have found that they have finished sooner than they expected, which is unusual in a case like this. So they have proven, certain things, right? They brought on Cassie Ventura, who was a very compelling witness, as well as Jane, who talked about the freak-offs and how coercive the relationship was. And they put into evidence certain videos, the beating in the hotel that everyone's seen, as well as they've shown the jurors some of the freak-off videos, which are supposedly, although we don't know that, very tantalizing and very graphic. And they've also obviously brought forward corroborating witnesses. We've heard heard from assistants, we've heard from male escorts, we've heard from other personnel who have also sort of detailed how there might have been coercion or fraud or abuse and things like that. So they have put forward some evidence. Now, on the flip side, you know, it's very difficult to prove a racketeering RICO case. It's so complex, and it's usually expected in an area of a mafia or some other, you know, sort of, you know, agent who you expect to do this. So this is a tad bit of a complex case, and while they've done a good job, I think there's still, you know, we're hoping more to come on how this actually rolls into being some sort of sex trafficking, commercial prostitution, racketeering that we still haven't seen yet.
Now, a lot of the witnesses that they brought on to prove their case have either gotten paid in civil settlements with Combs, or they got full immunity deals from the prosecutors, and their hands weren't exactly clean, so to speak. What effect does that have on their credibility in front of a jury?
Yeah, Lisa, I think we often find these in racketeering cases that there are often a lot of bad actors. And in this case in particular, there are a lot of people who were actually involved in the group sex, orgies, racketeering, commercial sex, whatever you want to call it. And those people obviously have gotten a plea of some sort that we don't know off record, where they won't be necessarily prosecuted for their involvement in these cases. So there is an incentive for them to bolster the prosecutor's case here, and that obviously makes a question of their credibility.
Now, in terms of the defense, they're estimating that their case presentation of their side is going to take 2 to 5 days. Does that sound super short when we're talking about the prosecution case, which went on for weeks, for well over a month?
Well, luckily for the defense, the burden is not on them. It is not a requirement for Diddy to prove anything. I think so far they've named 3 witnesses that they plan to call, and I think the big question that everybody's waiting to figure out is the hip-hop mogul himself going to take this stand and testify on his own behalf? I think that's what everybody is now waiting to hear.
And what do you think? What's your opinion on that?
Oh, it's such a tough call. As a defense attorney, I tend to encourage my clients to not take the stand. I think very little good can come from taking the stand, as we've obviously seen, and as you know, Sean Combs has admitted. He has been involved in some less than glamorous situations involving especially domestic violence. I think it'll be hard to convince a jury that he's not, you know, has totally clean hands.
And then finally, Robin, the jurors. One juror dismissed, another juror under scrutiny. Is that unusual this late into a case, into a trial?
This is shocking, to be quite honest. I mean, this residency issue was kind of unexpected. I don't think a lot of us saw it coming. And obviously, the makeup of the jury is important. Right?
The racial makeup.
The racial makeup.
The gender
and the gender
racial.
makeup. It all makes a difference. You obviously have a right to be tried by a jury of your peers.
Right.
And it feels almost like the prosecution is gaming the system a little bit by insisting that this credibility issue is so big that the person cannot be honest and sit on the jury. I haven't seen that too many times in my experience as a lawyer.
Coming up, where do we draw the line between consent and coercion?
Consent is always a gray area when we're talking about coercion, because there is that underlying intimidation.
Welcome back to the special episode of Street Soldiers, on location at the Diddy trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. Diddy's defense team maintains that any sex was consensual, but prosecutors say the female victims were coerced. Let's find out what that really means with clinical psychologist Dr. Kendra Deutschek. First of all, let's start with the Diddy trial, how the victims, the alleged victims, are being portrayed. What do you make of that? How do you interpret it?
Generally speaking, what we're seeing emerge with this trial, and what typically emerges with this kind of trial involving intimate partner violence, involving coercive control, whether that's under the umbrella of trafficking or not, we see a certain kind of criminalizing of the victim, right? Her behaviors are scrutinized. Her behaviors are put under a microscope. Why didn't she leave? Why did she stay? Why didn't she call the police? We need proof, right? We've all seen a video, we've all seen the video of a very violent assault. And yet there's this tendency to question the victims. There's this tendency, if they don't fit that perfect victim narrative, if there's one smudge on their record, then there's almost an instinct to deny her credibility. And that happens for a number of different reasons, but I think particularly relevant to this trial is a misunderstanding of the kinds of abuses that we're hearing the witnesses describe. And what I would call that is coercive control. And very briefly, coercive control just refers to a set of ongoing, interwoven, strategic tactics designed to decrease a victim's independence or autonomy and increase her dependence on that abusive partner.
So what you're saying is this coercive control, and coercion is a key part of what the prosecutors have to prove in this case.
Yep.
It's not necessarily what we would think of as like physical force, where you have a gun or a knife to your head and you have to do this or else you're going to suffer, you're going to be hurt very, very badly or lose your life. It's more psychological. Like, how does that play out?
That's exactly right. And it can come in various different forms: intimidation, manipulation, isolating the victim, surveilling the victim. And because so much of that violence is invisible, right, it's not physical violence, it can be misunderstood by the lay audiences, by legal actors, even by clinicians, because we don't fully understand those dynamics that are operating. So a victim may read a text message and the subtext is very clear. It's derogatory, maybe even it's a threat, because she has that history with the abuser. To us, we may read it as something different. It may be flirty or playful, because we don't have that history and we don't know how those invisible tactics have been operating in the relationship.
There's been a lot of talk about drug use here, drug use on the part of the alleged victims, drug use by Combs. They've admitted at times that they've been addicted. They've suffered, gone through periods where they've been addicted to all these various drugs. What role do drugs play in terms of an abuser trying to get this coercive control, as you call it, over a potential victim?
Yeah. So sometimes drugs are used really early on to kind of disinhibit the victim. Sometimes, consent can be really gray in instances of coercion, right? Maybe the victim says, yes, okay, I'll do this drug with you, or I'll take this drug. And consent is always a gray area when we're talking about coercion, because there is that underlying intimidation and manipulation. Other times the drugs are used non-consensually, completely, right? They're slipped in drinks or otherwise. And so you see drug use operating in various ways, particularly when we're talking about trafficking and similar allegations.
Another thing that people have been raising a lot of questions about that's been happening in this trial is these alleged victims. They testify, a couple that he sexually assaulted them, that they were physically abused, as we saw with the horrific Cassie hotel video. But afterwards, like even in that case, Cassie twice, immediately after, declined to talk to the police. And then others after these horrific incidents saying that, sending him text messages, I love you, you're the best, take me back. How should we be looking at testimony like that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It's actually not entirely uncommon that victims of this kind of abuse, coercion, coercive control, will have that response. And we have to remember that, to us, this is an abuser or a trafficker. Right. To the victim, to use the language of some of their testimony, it's a lover, it's a partner, it's a mentor, an employer. And so, there's on the one hand that coercive control, it's present all the time. On the other end of the spectrum, there's moments of kindness, of generosity, of affection, quality time, the things that we would expect to see in a healthy relationship. And it's not unnatural for a victim to work really hard to get back to that good place.
And then, Dr. Deutschik, what about the issue of money? Because a lot of these alleged victims have benefited financially from their, either while working for him or in lawsuits, or in the case of Jane, he was and still is, Diddy is still paying her $10,000 a month rent on her house, but really tens of thousands of dollars on her in other ways, helping her with a business and that type of thing. Where do you see the role of money in a case like this?
So from an outsider's perspective, we might immediately look at it and say, oh my gosh, she's benefiting so much from this person, right? Her rent is paid, etc. I actually think about finances in this sense as a means and method of control. Well, who pays your rent? What happens if you defy this person? What happens if you disobey or go against? You lose your rent, you lose your housing. So the stakes are very high when finances are involved. And financial abuse and financial exploitation is a common tactic in coercive control in relationships.
Stay with us, there's more coming up.
I think there's always going to be conversation around Puff moving forward just because of the things that we've seen, all the things that he's accused of, and ultimately whatever the end result of this trial is.
Welcome back to this special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy Trial. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. The music industry is obsessed with this case, but many celebrities and others are staying away and staying silent. Let's find out why right now with Hip Hop Nation host, MC, and songwriter, Portrayed. People are talking about it everywhere, and you're plugged into a lot of different, communities within the hip hop world and Hip Hop Nation. What are people saying?
So many thoughts. I think there's a mixed bag of some people are like, is it a witch hunt? Some people are like, are they actually talking about the things in the RICO case, or is this just to embarrass him or to expose his alleged sexual proclivities?
And then you worked with him. What was his work ethic as hardcore and epic as people say?
Absolutely. He always strived for perfection in the studio. Just some of the things that I got a chance to hear, privy to before he released his latest album. He's just one of those guys who was really a perfectionist when it came to the art.
And one of the things that people had a lot of problems with was that he started losing his accolades, and he had to give back the key to the city, and all of that before there was even a trial. Before the charges were even fully announced, or before he was even indicted.
Yeah.
So people are saying, okay, the judge, like a rush to judgment. The social media, I call it the social media Supreme Court, had already issued their ruling. And what about a sense? Are people concerned about a sense of fairness about all of it without taking whether he's guilty or innocent aside?
I think the court of public perception, or the social media, court, is swift. That rush to judgment is swift, and I think there's always going to be conversation around Puff moving forward just because of the things that we've seen, all the things that he's accused of, and ultimately whatever the end result of this trial is. So there's a lot of talk, but yes, people are really, really quick to judge, and you got to get the facts out there and you got to see. But I think when you saw the video, at least for me, when I saw the video, it made it that much more real that some of the things that they're accusing him of might actually be the case.
And were you shocked when you saw that? It's like everybody knew he had a temper, people knew he liked to party, people knew there was a lot of drug use, and of course, different women and that type of thing, but when you saw that, it was like, whoa, right?
Yeah. I mean, partying is one thing. I will firmly say I'm against domestic violence in any form. Man to woman, woman to man, same sex. I think DV is just horrendous. It's a deal breaker for me, but it doesn't change what he did musically. It doesn't change what he contributed to the space of entertainment that we all came up in.
And how would you describe that to somebody that wasn't really familiar with it? Because there was that time in New York too where every song that was being played, not everyone, but the vast majority were Bad Boy records.
Sure. If it wasn't a Bad Boy record, it was a Bad Boy remix. It was a Bad Boy feature on it. I mean, he dominated. They dominated the space. I think he kind of reinvented music a couple of times with the artists that he signed, with the way that he was able to take samples and familiar loops and just bring new life into them and bring new awareness to some of these classic artists. So yeah, I mean, I came up in New York City in the 90s. That was Bad Boy's time.
Is there a danger of people completely forgetting what his contributions were?
Wow. I think there's always going to be an asterisk next to it. Just because when you get allegations of this sort, when you get a trial of this magnitude, people are always going to talk about it. I think for generation and generation, I think that's where it gets scary, because as the older generation passes on and moves on, who's going to continue to talk about the entire legacy, and not just the last parts of where he is right now in 2025. And so that part gets a little scary because we've got to tell our own stories, and we've got to continue to be able to keep our legacies going. And Puff is going to have the asterisk next to his, but I hope that it doesn't completely overshadow what he brought to the game.
Right, and how he evolved it at that critical time, in that whole critical era. Now, you're national co-chair for the Advocacy Committee for the Recording Academy, taking on different issues. Are there certain issues here, and you're very involved in the community too, Are there certain issues that this whole case is raising that you think we as a community need to be more focused on?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got to advocate, this case aside, we've got to advocate for victims. We've got to make sure that we believe when people come forth, because it takes a certain amount of courage to come forth, especially when you're coming against, you know, people that may have a lot of power, people that may be really successful, have a lot of money.
We'll be back right after this. Thanks for joining us for this special episode of Street Soldiers on location at the Diddy Trial. You can watch the show again and share it on our Fox 5 NY YouTube page and the Fox Local app. Remember, use your mind, it's your best weapon. I'm Lisa Evers. Let's push for peace, love, and justice for all.